So let's get going. My name's Janet Grauberg, and I'm one of the hosts of the session. And I'm joined by Gabriel Eichsteller from FEMPRA. You'll hear a bit more about that later, and by Claire Baker, who's going to be presenting later. And this is the first in a series of webinars that we want to do about relational working, especially with young people with care experience. So the principles are widely drawn, but we're drawing our examples and our case studies from working with young people who have experience of the care system in England. What we want to do is to share some of the resources that we found helpful when we did a program jointly with the National Leaving Care Benchmarking Forum about supporting young people with care experience. And all of these resources are on the website of the National Leaving Care Benchmarking Forum, and Gabriel will put the link in the chat. And we're going to give you a quick overview of the resources and how we got there, and then we're going to do a deep dive into one of the topics that we looked at on that program, which is young people's experience of relationships and what they tell us about what matters to them. We're generously funded by the Esme Fairbairn Foundation that funded a number of the charities that were part of the program, and we went back to them for some more funds for this program of webinars, because we thought that just putting a load of resources on a website was about the least relational thing that you could do. Actually, you know, here it is, here's a flat thing, there's no interaction, there's no chance for discussion. So our objective is to have a relational conversation about relational working, and to give you some places you can go to find out a bit more. In a sense, the metaphor that we have is that there's a wonderful library of stuff behind us, and there'll be more stuff that we put on. And if you've got stuff you want us to share, please put links in the chat or send it to us. So there's a wonderful library, but actually if you go into a library and you're faced with books and papers and you don't know where to go, actually what you need is a librarian to say, oh yes, I think I understand what you're asking for, that's over on this shelf, and I'll come with you and I'll pull out a couple of books for you that you might be wanting to start with. So at this point in my head, I have a sort of Harry Potter-esque library picture in my head. You might have your own favorite libraries. So imagine that we're going to try and introduce a couple of bits to you. So that is the task for today. I'm going to do a bit of a background, then Claire is going to do a bit of background, and then there'll be a chance for talking to each other. So we're going to start with just a bit of an overview on the peer learning program that I mentioned. So we've been working, so I work with the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, which is a big philanthropic funder that funds 35 charities, VCS organisations that work with young people leaving care. We joined up with the National Leaving Care Benchmarking Forum because we knew there was a lot of talk about, and a lot of people keen to work more relationally with young people with care experience and around them with the colleagues that they work with. But actually people were finding it hard to actually make those, to change the way they work in the big systems that we work in the day-to-day pressures, finding the time, finding the focus. And so the program was all about supporting participants to take practical action to work in a more relational way. So we support, so the program comprised 12 local authorities, 3 voluntary organisations, and we took part in 6 half-day online sessions. And each of the organisations brought a specific project that they wanted to work work on. So, for example, they might have identified that they were working with a number of young people who were young parents and maybe a bit more isolated from some of the groups that they were running, or those who were starting a lifelong link service for their care experienced young people, maybe having brought it in for those in care. And so that was the program that we ran, and the impact that program made, I would say, has had three different impacts. So firstly, that it built professional relationships across departments and with partner agencies. So there was a number of organizations that brought, actually, that they thought they wanted to improve their professional relationships in order to support young people better. And those were sort of agency level. And then the second impact was that people found that if they were able to work more closely with some of their colleagues, either in their same organization or in those other agencies, they were able to support young people better. So there were a number of sort of multidisciplinary teams that shared training, time out, ideas and tools that helped them understand each other's perspective, so that between them they could give joined up support to the young people they were working with. And then the third impact was in terms of their support for the young people themselves, supporting them in building relationships with each other and with people who meant something to them. So a couple of the projects were looking at sort of groups, I've already mentioned, with young parents, or those who'd come here as unaccompanied asylum seekers and perhaps didn't feel connected to others with care experience who'd been through the care system since they were young children, or with people who meant something to them, such as through lifelong links or other similar programs, or staying close, or similar programs like that. So that's what the program was. And I would say we had 7 sort of bits of key learning from that work together. That actually if we work more relationally with our colleagues, it enables us to support young people better. And we used the metaphor and the model of the relational universe to help us see how our roles fitted together. So there'll be a session like this on the relational universe model, and how that really helps as a way of thinking about from the young person's point of view, who is it in their universe that matters to them, and how is that changing over time? The second key learning, and we might want to come back to this in the conversation, I always found this a really helpful conversation starter, is we had a conversation about interdependence rather than independence. So I've worked in the leaving care field for nearly 25 years, and we've always talked about preparing young people for independence. And actually, I've been challenging myself and the people I work with to think about, are we preparing them for interdependence, for connecting with people, living with other people, whether that's flatmates or partners, relying on other people, being able to ask for help, and offering support to others. So interdependence rather than, or as well as, independence. We had a good discussion about using the word love in our work and the concept of love in a professional world. And another model that we found really helpful was the 3 Ps model, thinking about our professional, personal, and private selves, what we share in order to connect with people, and what we keep private. And there'll be another session specifically on the 3 Ps model later in the program of webinars. We heard from young people that reliability and consistency and what they want in their relationships with professionals. And we challenge ourselves to see actually relationships are an end in themselves, not a means to an end. So we often fall into the trap of saying, I need to build a relationship so that I can point them to an employment outcome, or I can steer them away from an offending journey, or I can support them to have a stable tenancy. Actually, relationships are an end in themselves, not a means to an end for us as professionals. And then towards the end of the program, we thought about how we might be able to assess progress in the building relationships. We're not measuring it, but there are these tools and techniques such as subjective well-being surveys and systems such as most significant change approaches to hear what young people and professionals say to them. 2 final bits of learning: starting with a small focus project is better than tackling everything at once. And relational practice ain't what we do, it's the way that you do it. Cue the song. And so that's really just what I wanted to finish on, that you know, we have relationships everywhere. Sometimes thinking about working relationally is it can be overwhelming, but starting small and starting somewhere is always a good, is better than not starting at all. So I'm going to finish there and hand over to just talk you through the resources that are available that give a bit more detail on what I've spoken. So if you go, this is the main landing page for the webinars, for the resources. I'm the peer learning program background you just had five minutes on, this links to a bit more about the program, that key learning that we've just talked about, and then deeper, fuller reports and a couple of videos from the participants that talked about what they learned and what got out of it, and some suggestions for how you might use these resources. We'll put the links to that in the chat several times during this session. Grand, I'm stopping there and handing over to Claire, who's going to talk about young people's views on relationships.
Yeah, brilliant. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to connect with you all today. And linked to what Janet just said, we were thinking, well, where to start with these webinars and sharing what we learned through the spaces we created to think and act more relationally. And we did that thing where we just thought, webinar 1, we're going to jump in with young people's voices. So what have we learned? What do we know about what young people tell us is important about their relationships? So I'll just take you through some of that learning quite quickly. And then again, I'll signpost you to the resource on the website. And as Janet said, I really like that concept of being a bit of a librarian, and you know, these resources are there for interaction, and we're hoping to point things out. So if we just moved to the next place, brilliant. So I love this question as something to reflect on in the work that we're doing. So what makes a good life? What makes life good? As the kind of anchor for focusing how we support and scaffold what we do around what's important to care experienced young people. And the Bright Spots programme, which is an initiative from Quorum Voice with a long history with the University of Oxford, worked with care leavers as they were growing older and leaving care to ask that question, what makes life good? And this diagram really jumps out for me around relationships. So the things that we learn through that program is around trust. So young people reminding us, have they got someone in their life they trust, who's got their back, that they can rely on? And the things that we see here are not always things we have conversations about. So I loved in the chat people talking about their dogs, their cats, and echoed across. So care experienced young people talking about pets and the importance of friends, reminding us that support isn't just about the practical, but about the emotional. And in the blue section, the relationships we have as workers, and trust, of course, coming up really strongly there, and consistency and availability. And, you know, looking and engaging with these areas makes us hopefully reflect on some of the barriers that systems can put in place. So changing worker, why? What's that about? Is that for the benefit of the service or the benefit of the young person? So we just wanted to start with that diagram that tries to help us focus our shift our focus to thinking about what makes a good life, as much more emphasis on what young people tell us is important. And if we look at the next piece here, I would say that everything on that diagram is important. It's grounded in young people's voices and feelings and how they feel they're doing and what's important to their well-being. But the analysis of the responses, and we've had over 10,000 care leavers across the UK take part in this wellbeing survey, the analysis shows that statistically, some things are more strongly associated with well-being. So there may be an argument, is that where we may want to focus some of our attention, not losing sight of the other things, but it's a kind of way in, really. And if we just looked next across those 10 areas, again, what jumps out of those 10 areas associated strongly with well-being: trusting relationships, not feeling lonely. So the reverse, of course, feeling connected and having a really good friend. And so if we just moved on to thinking around, and Janet mentioned this, so the peer learning program that we ran was that time for that space to have some honest conversations about our services and appraise. Sometimes, you know, that leaving care transition benchmark, the aim of leaving care, is it really to set young people up to living without support, to be independent and not dependent? And I think that really, the concept of interdependence and about focusing on building and maintaining networks of support rather than expecting young people to manage much more independently is helpful. And I love this quote, but it always strikes me as very poignant. So I know how to live independent like surviving, but I don't know how to live independent as like being happy and living. And yeah, just a bit of a challenge to ourselves through that peer learning to think about any changes we can make in that narrative and the policy and the support and how we deliver, and thinking about our emphasis on emotional support. So if we move on to the next slide, so just a short example, and again in the resource that I'll show you in a moment, there's lots of examples of how local authorities and other services are responding. And I think Janet's point about starting small, not being overwhelmed. So this was an example from Oldham, who had heard from their young people as they were leaving care about the proportion who felt lonely often or always, about a fifth reporting that. So what could they do? What were the tweaks, the changes to working more relationally, being more available, doing some fun things together? So I think the picture is from climbing. It looks a particularly wet and miserable day, climbing up some hills or possibly a mountain. Maybe we'll call it a mountain. And so the example there, which you'll be able to look at in more detail, is around those changes around how we work and how we organize ourselves, really. So I think starting with what young people tell us about their relationships and focusing on trust and listening to that whole breadth of who young people identify as important is a really good starting point. And I think, Gabriel, if we were to move on to the resource, I could just show people what's there. So we've got a little bit of a blog just with some links to the Bright Spots program that I mentioned, and then some of the kind of findings highlighted there around the proportions of young people feeling they don't always have a good friend, or things have happened, that relationships haven't been nurtured and maintained. If we just move down, there's the resource bank from Quorum Voice, which is a great source of different examples to inspire other people. So in Stockport, some work there around what we talked about when there's a change of worker, kind of really appraising when everybody wants that relationship to continue, what are the ways for that to be permissible and happen. So there's a write-up, and East Riding some fun in there. So building relationships, through doing things together and enjoying ourselves. And then some of the other resources that we've pulled together that we used and were able to refer to through the program, really listening to young people. So the TED Talk from Laura Beveridge is, again, a really worth sitting together as a team, having a cup of tea, spending some time. There's a great poem where the young person voices their feelings about friendship. So the podcast. So we've just tried to pull together different resources that really focus on what we can learn from our care experienced young people, and then some ideas for action. And we're going to move into talking to each other and thinking together, and we've just put some questions about is there space for those conversations in our day-to-day work around friendships, around trust, around loneliness? How do we negotiate endings? So lots of hopefully resources to share, and hopefully create the space to use some of the things that we've learned as we've been looking to work in a more relational way. Thanks, Gabriel.
Thank you, Claire. So as promised, we're now going to have time for chat. So Gabriel's going to throw us into random breakout groups, and we're going to have 8 to 10 minutes just covering these two questions. A chance to say, how's my organization doing in terms of relational working, and how are we integrating what young people tell us about relationships into the way we work? So hang on to your hats, and we'll be about 7 or 8 minutes in breakout groups. If you had a good conversation and you're willing to share something, please just write yes in the chat, and then I can pick a couple of yeses. No requirement to share. It's just if you'd like to share a nugget from your conversation, that would be good to hear. We in the group that I was in here, we had a conversation about language and how tweaking your language can help to sort of move the conversation a bit towards a different way of thinking. Lynn, you're the first with a yes. What would you like to share from your breakout group?
I thought somebody ought to. There was only Martina and I, because Mel couldn't get her microphone to work. So we both thought that we couldn't remember the second question, but we remembered the first one. So we both felt, Martina and I, that where we were, she was working with adopted children in an organisation that's been going for 10 years, and she thought that hers was really on point and that they were quite there. I would say we're still on our journey. One big thing we've just done is we've got two supported accommodation homes in Blackpool. So we work with teenagers, and we've just removed all punishments and consequences, which felt like jumping off a cliff. We were all terrified, and I argued with a lot of trainers about that. but we did it and it's been amazing. So really gone down that relational journey and natural consequences, and it's much nicer. So that has made a huge difference. And we both also use the PACE model, which isn't kind of so ubiquitous for no reason. We both think, it's good. So that was our conversation.
Lovely, thank you. And if you've got a link to the PACE model, stick it in the chat and we'll see if we can add it to the resource pack.
Martina is actually a trainer. We had training recently, so Martina is a training. But shall I just put PACE there? Everybody can Google that.
Thank you. And Julie, you're the next yeser.
Hi everyone. Sorry I can't put my camera on because my laptop shuts down. Yeah, I was with Suzanne from Stoke-on-Trent. I'm based in Liverpool. So in terms of relational working, we both sort of from a family group conference background. So, I'm not a frontline worker, I'm a manager. But in terms of my team, we had to switch some of our work because as a children's service, we felt more that we was an adult service dealing with family members and not focusing on the children. So we, in terms of our values as Liverpool, we wanted to reduce carbon footprint as well. So instead of visiting everyone, we started using, more Teams and phone calls, and then spending most of our time direct work with the child or the young person. So we'd find out from those family members, what's the likes and dislikes, what are they interested in? And then I would say, well, make time to plan and prepare for that meeting with the child, because unfortunately, we're not involved with children for that long. We need to get the consent from the family to work with them. And then to get it right, we need to make sure that we build that rapport. So the team have been really, really creative and we've come up with all kinds of ideas. They've done they've made games, they've made them up, they've done direct work with children. We've had meetings with the Children in Care Council to come up with a logo, like what do you want to say, what do we need to do better? So we've done things like my makeup bag, like little girls and some of the lads really are into makeup. I was like, okay, who do you see? So we've got a big thingy of eyeshadows, and who do you talk to? We've got lipstick. So it's just like those interactions where you put makeup on and we can talk about, well, what in your life makes you rosy? Then you're there with the blusher. So it's just little things about being creative and to get that engagement. And then the second one is how we are integrating young people and tell us about relationship in the way we work. So that again, we've just got to work with the families as well to get the consent. And things like you said we did, and we tailor our children's plans for children so they understand what's happening in their lives. It's not about the parents, because sometimes that doesn't get shared or passed down. They need to be involved. So I know a lot of people have used signs of safety models in the past. So we've used like words and pictures to make it more engaging for children. So if you've got like a family plan with a load of words and stuff that who's going to do what, when and how, all the child wants to know is, for instance, when am I going to see my dad? Is it going to coincide with my footy practice? Because I don't want to miss that. So we've got to hear when they want to see them, where they want to see them, and what activities they like. And if we get that and do it with pictures, that's what works well for them. So we are on the right track. We've still got a long way to go, though.
Lots of ideas there. Really nice. Thank you so much for sharing that. Grand. We've got 5 minutes left, and people don't come to a session that I'm involved without thinking about action planning. So I'd just like you in the next 2 minutes to think about, what action am I going to take as a result of today's session? We're not going to share this, just write it down for yourself. And how am I going to make sure that I do it? So in the little hedgehog graphic, some ideas. Are you going to email yourself? Are you going to make a calendar entry? Are you going to take a bright pink post-it or something else creative? So we'll just have a couple of minutes of silence as we think about what action I'm going to take as a result of today's session. If you want to put it in the chat, please do, but it's much more important that you put it on something that you are going to remember to do. So maybe put a half an hour in your calendar to do what it is you say you were going to do, or send yourself an old-fashioned postcard. Grand. Hopefully you have written something down and reminded yourself somehow. That's the end of the session for today. We've come to the last couple of minutes. Just a reminder, these are this is the first one of a series. You don't have to book for all of them. You don't have to book for any of them. But this is what we are covering next. So the next one will be about research. That's the 6th of November. And then we'll be thinking about interdependence, and that'll be about the relational universe, and they run all the way into March, where we're hoping to run the rest of, give you loads of links to other resources. We will send you the slides and a link to the recording if you've been here or if you intended to be here. All of the resources that we've talked about today and the recordings of this webinar, when they're ready, will be up on the website there, leavingcare.org, Relational Practice resources, and the booking link for those webinars is there. So I hope you've enjoyed the session. Thank you to Gabriel, our host, and to Claire for the presentation. And I hope very much to see you on the 6th of November, and to have encouraged you in your journey to working relationally. Thank you all.